They threw a party 3 days after they killed me. My mother-in-law popped champagne in the hospital hallway. My husband's mistress tried on my wedding dress in my own bedroom. They laughed. They celebrated. They even picked out a name for my baby. A name I never
Andrew, the
chose.
pathology
And I
report
heard every
confirms our
single
fears.
word.
The tumor is malignant,
Because here's
and
the
it's
thing
spreading
they didn't
aggressively.
know.
We
I
need to
wasn't
discuss
dead.
your options
I was
immediately.
trapped inside
I'm
my
right
own
here,
body,
Samantha.
fully conscious,
Just focus on
completely
my
paralyzed,
boys.
listening to them
You're
plan
strong.
how
You
to
can get
spend
through
my
this.
life insurance money. For 30
Don't
days,
fight it,
I heard
Samantha.
everything. The affair,
This is
the
much easier if
conspiracy,
you just
the plan
sleep.
to sell one of my newborn twins for $150,000 cash. They thought I was helpless. They thought I couldn't fight back. They were so incredibly wrong. What happens next will shock you to your core. But before we begin, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you do not want to miss a single second of this story. Trust me, the ending is something you will never see coming. Now, let me tell you about the day I died. This story will teach you something powerful. Never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose, because when they think you're helpless, when they count you out, when they celebrate your defeat, that's exactly when you become the most dangerous. If you've ever felt betrayed, abandoned, or powerless, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because what Samantha does next will change the way you see survival, strength, and justice forever. My name is Samantha Brennan. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, the only daughter of Marcus Brennan, a homicide detective who spent 30 years putting murderers behind bars, and Catherine Brennan, a school teacher who died of cancer when I was 22 years old. I inherited my father's stubbornness and my mother's kindness, and for most of my life, I thought that combination would protect me from the worst the world had to offer. It didn't. This is the story of how I died, came back, and destroyed everyone who betrayed me. It started 6 months before the delivery room, 6 months before the blood and the screaming and the moment my heart stopped beating on an operating table while my husband stood in the corner checking his phone. It started with a pregnancy test, 2 pink lines, and my husband Andrew's smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I remember that October morning with perfect clarity. The Connecticut autumn light was streaming through our bedroom windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The cream-colored sheets beneath me cost more than my first car. The 4-poster bed had been in Andrew's family for 3 generations. The view from our window showed maple trees in full fall colors, a manicured lawn that a team of landscapers maintained twice a week, and a wrought iron fence that separated our property from the neighbors we never spoke to. This was my life now. Beautiful, expensive, empty in ways I was only beginning to understand. Andrew was still in bed when I came out of the bathroom holding the pregnancy test. My hands were shaking. We had been trying for 2 years, 2 years of temperature charts and ovulation kits and carefully timed intimacy that had started to feel more like a medical procedure than an act of love. Andrew, I said. Andrew, come here. Look at this. He sat up in bed, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The morning light caught his features in a way that reminded me why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. Strong jaw, dark hair, with just a hint of gray at the temples. Blue eyes that could make you feel like the only person in the room when they focused on you. But lately, those eyes rarely focused on me. What is it? He asked, reaching for his phone on the nightstand before even looking at what I was holding. I held up the test. 2 pink lines. We're having a baby, I said. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something genuine cross his face. Surprise, maybe even joy. He got out of bed and hugged me, and I let myself sink into that embrace. Let myself believe that this baby would fix everything that had gone wrong between us. That's when I noticed it. His phone. He was checking his phone over my shoulder while he hugged me. Quick, subtle, like he thought I wouldn't notice. I noticed. I always noticed. But I filed it away, like I had been filing things away for months. The late nights at work, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the way he would excuse himself to take calls in another room, the unfamiliar perfume I sometimes smelled on his shirts. I filed it all away because I wanted to believe in the life we were building. I wanted to believe that the handsome, charming man I had married 3 years ago was still in there somewhere, underneath the distance and the distraction. I was a fool, but I was about to become something else entirely. Let me tell you about Andrew Cole, because understanding him is essential to understanding everything that came after. Andrew came from old money, not just wealthy, old money, the kind of money that builds hospital wings and names them after itself, the kind of money that makes problems disappear and makes people forget inconvenient truths, the kind of money that spans generations and corrupts everyone it touches. His great-grandfather had made a fortune in railroads at the turn of the century. His grandfather had multiplied it through real estate. His father had managed it poorly and died of a heart attack when Andrew was 16, leaving the family empire in the hands of his mother, Margaret Cole. That name still makes my skin crawl. Margaret had married into the Cole family fortune 40 years ago, a beautiful young woman from a respectable but not wealthy family who had caught the eye of Richard Cole at a charity gala. She had spent the next 4 decades protecting that fortune like a dragon guards its hoard, and she had raised her only son to believe that the Cole family name was more important than anything else in the world, more important than honesty, more important than decency, more important than the lives of anyone who got in the way. Margaret never liked me. From the moment Andrew brought me home to meet her, I could see the calculation in her cold blue eyes. I was a nurse from Ohio, middle class. My father drove a 10-year-old pickup truck and thought a fancy dinner meant the Olive Garden on special occasions. I didn't come from the right family. I didn't understand how things worked in their world. But Andrew chose me anyway, or at least I thought he did. We met at a charity gala 3 years before the pregnancy test. I was working as a nurse at Hartford General, pulling double shifts to pay off my student loans. One of the doctors had invited me to the event as his plus one, a networking opportunity, he said, a chance to rub elbows with potential donors for the hospital. I wore a dress I had bought on clearance and felt completely out of place among the designer gowns and inherited jewelry. I was standing by the bar, nursing a glass of champagne I couldn't really afford, and wondering how soon I could politely leave when Andrew appeared beside me. "You look like you would rather be anywhere else," he said with a smile that showed perfect white teeth. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who feels the same way. He was charming, attentive. He asked about my work, and when I told him I was an ER nurse, he seemed genuinely interested. Not the polite, glazed-over interest of someone making small talk, but real curiosity about what I did and why I did it. "That must be incredible," he said. "Saving lives, making a real difference." "It's not always like the TV shows," I admitted. "Most of the time it's paperwork and dealing with insurance companies and watching people die because they couldn't afford to see a doctor sooner. But sometimes you save them." "Sometimes," I agreed. "Sometimes we save them." He smiled at me then, and I felt something shift in my chest, something that felt like possibility. He pursued me relentlessly after that night. Flowers delivered to the hospital, surprise weekend trips to places I had never been able to afford, dinners at restaurants where the menu didn't have prices, because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. I should have been suspicious. I should have wondered why a man like Andrew Cole, heir to a family fortune, was so interested in a nurse from Ohio who drove a Honda Civic and lived in a studio apartment. But I was 29 years old. I had spent my 20s working 70-hour weeks and watching my mother die slowly of cancer and trying to build a career that would make her proud. I had never had time for romance, never had someone pursue me like I was the most important person in the world. So I let myself fall in love. And when Andrew proposed after 6 months, I said yes. The wedding was everything I had never dreamed of because I had never dared to dream that big. 200 guests, a cathedral ceremony, a reception at the Cole family estate that cost more than I would have made in a decade of nursing. My father walked me down the aisle in a rented tuxedo, looking uncomfortable but proud. He had been suspicious of Andrew from the start, the cop's instinct that never quite turned off. But he had kept his concerns to himself because he wanted me to be happy. I remember the look he gave me right before he handed me off to Andrew. A look that said, "I hope you know what you're doing." I didn't. The first sign of trouble came on our honeymoon. We were in Bali, staying at a resort that cost $3,000 a night. I had never experienced anything like it. Private villa, infinity pool overlooking the ocean, staff who appeared silently whenever you needed anything and disappeared just as silently when you didn't. On the third night, Andrew's phone rang during dinner. He excused himself to take the call, and I sat alone at the table, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, trying not to feel the cold knot forming in my stomach. He was gone for 45 minutes. When he came back, he apologized. "Work emergency," he said. "You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I was a nurse. When I was off shift, I was off shift. But I smiled and nodded and let him refill my wine glass. That pattern continued after we returned to Connecticut. Andrew worked in real estate development, technically, but mostly he managed the family's existing properties and attended meetings and played golf with men who had names like Thornton and Bradford. He was rarely home before 8 o'clock. Sometimes he didn't come home until midnight. Business dinners, he would say. Networking events. You understand. I understood that I was spending most of my evenings alone in a mansion that felt more like a museum than a home. I gave up my nursing career 6 months after the wedding. It was Margaret's suggestion, delivered with that cold smile of hers over Sunday brunch. "Coal wives don't work," she said, like it was a statement of natural law. "Coal wives support their husbands. Coal wives raise the next generation. Coal wives maintain the family's social position." Andrew didn't disagree. He thought it would be good for me to have more time. Time for what, he didn't specify. So I quit. Gave up 8 years of training and experience. Gave up the colleagues who had become like family. Gave up the sense of purpose that had gotten me out of bed every morning since I was 22 years old. I told myself it was a sacrifice worth making. I told myself I was building a new life, a better life. I was just building a more elaborate prison. The isolation happened so gradually, I didn't notice it until it was nearly complete. My friends from nursing school stopped calling because I was always too busy with charity functions and social obligations. My father and I went from talking every day to talking once a month because Margaret always seemed to schedule family events on the same weekends I had planned to visit Ohio. Looking back, I can see how deliberately it was done, how carefully Margaret cut me off from everyone who might have seen what was happening, who might have warned me. But at the time, I just felt lonely, lost, like I had given up everything that made me who I was, and the person left behind was someone I didn't recognize. Then I found the burner phone. It was hidden in Andrew's car, tucked under the spare tire in the trunk. I wasn't even looking for it. My car battery had died, and I needed jumper cables to get to a prenatal checkup. 12 weeks pregnant with what I thought was our miracle baby. The phone was cheap, prepaid, the kind you buy at a convenience store when you don't want anyone to trace your calls. It rang while I was holding it, an unfamiliar number. I answered without thinking. "Hey, baby." A woman's voice, young, confident, intimate in a way that made my blood freeze. "I've been waiting for you. When are you coming over?" I recognized her voice immediately. Jennifer Ashworth, Andrew's executive assistant, 28 years old, tall and blonde and beautiful, in that sharp, hungry way that had made me uncomfortable at company dinners without being able to explain why. I hung up without saying a word. I stood there in my garage, 12 weeks pregnant, holding a dead phone and the smoking ruins of my marriage. The old Samantha would have confronted him immediately, would have screamed and cried and demanded answers, would have given him the chance to lie his way out of it, to explain it away, to make me doubt what I had heard with my own ears. But something changed in me in that moment. Something went cold and still and calculating. If Andrew could lie this convincingly for this long, what else was he capable of? What else was he hiding? What else was his mother helping him hide? I needed to protect myself. I needed to protect my baby. I needed to prepare for war. That night, I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I greeted Andrew when he came home with a smile. I listened to his lies about his day and nodded in all the right places. And then I started planning. Over the next 5 months, I became someone I barely recognized. On the surface, I was the same dutiful wife Margaret expected me to be. I smiled at her passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, my decorating choices, my family. I pretended not to notice when Andrew came home, smelling like Jennifer's perfume. I played the role they expected me to play with perfect precision. But underneath that surface, I was preparing for every possible scenario. The first thing I did was update my will. I met with an attorney in Hartford, a woman named Rachel Torres, who came highly recommended and who had no connection whatsoever to the Cole family. I told her I wanted to make sure my child would be protected if anything happened to me. She didn't ask too many questions. Estate planning attorneys rarely do. "If something happens to me," I told her, "custody of my child goes to my father, Marcus Brennan, not to my husband, not to anyone in his family. My father." "Are you concerned about something specific?" Rachel asked carefully. "I'm a nurse. Sisani Aramis," I said. "I know how fast life can change. I want to be prepared." She drew up the documents. I signed them. I paid her fee in cash from my secret bank account, the one Andrew didn't know about. That was the second thing I did. The secret bank account. I opened it at a small credit union in a town 30 miles away from our home. I used my maiden name, Samantha Brennan, and my father's address in Ohio. Over the next 5 months, I slowly, carefully transferred money from our joint accounts, small amounts that wouldn't raise any flags, a few hundred here, a few hundred there. By the time I was 8 months pregnant, I had $50,000 hidden away, enough to start over if I needed to, enough to fight if I had to. The third thing I did was install cameras. I researched it carefully. In Connecticut, homeowners are legally allowed to install security cameras in their own homes. As long as I owned the property, and technically the house was in both our names, I could record whatever happened inside it. I bought 6 wireless cameras from Amazon. Tiny things, barely visible, easy to hide. I installed them myself while Andrew was at work. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, one in the master bedroom, one in Andrew's home office, one in the nursery we were preparing together like a happy couple expecting their first child, one in the hallway outside the bedroom. All of them uploaded automatically to cloud storage. Password protected, encrypted. If anything happened to me, there would be a record. The fourth thing I did was document everything. I bought a journal and kept it hidden in a tampon box under the bathroom sink. Every suspicious text I glimpsed on Andrew's phone, I wrote down. Every late night, every lie, every time his story didn't quite match up. I also started paying attention to Margaret in ways I never had before. She came to our house at least twice a week. She had a key. She let herself in whenever she wanted, regardless of whether we were home or expecting her. I had always thought it was just her controlling nature, her inability to respect boundaries. Now I wondered if it was something more. I started noticing the way she looked at me, the way her eyes would linger on my growing belly with an expression that wasn't quite joy, the way she talked about the baby as if I was merely the vessel that would deliver the next Cole heir. The Cole family needs an heir, she said once. When I was about 6 months pregnant, it's been too long since we had a new generation. This is our child, I said carefully, not just an heir. She smiled that cold smile of hers. Of course, dear, whatever you say. But her eyes said something different. Her eyes said that she was planning something, that she was waiting for something. 1 month before my due date, I found out what she was waiting for. It was a Thursday evening in late March. Andrew was supposed to be at a business dinner. Margaret had stopped by for what she called a quick visit that had already lasted 2 hours. I was exhausted, 8 months pregnant, barely sleeping, constantly uncomfortable. I excused myself to use the bathroom and then decided to go upstairs to lie down for a few minutes. That's when I heard them, Andrew's voice, coming from the study. He wasn't at a business dinner. He was in our house. We saw him meeting with his mother, and they both thought I was still downstairs. I should have announced myself, should have walked in and asked what was going on. Instead, I stood in the hallway, just around the corner, and listened. Have you talked to the attorney about the divorce timeline? Margaret asked. I felt my heart stop. Mom, can we wait until after the baby is born? Andrew sounded tired, frustrated. It's complicated. Complicated is having that woman raise a Cole. Margaret's voice was sharp. Jennifer is ready to step in. She understands our family. Samantha never has. What if Samantha fights for custody? There was a long, heavy pause. She won't be able to fight if she's not around to fight. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Mom, Andrew's voice was strange, uncertain. What are you saying? I'm saying, darling, that problems have solutions. They always do. I backed away from the door silently, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. My hands were pressed against my belly, against the baby kicking inside me, completely unaware that her father and grandmother were casually discussing eliminating her mother. I made it back to the bathroom without making a sound, locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub, and tried to breathe. Problems have solutions. That's what Margaret had said, like I was a problem, like getting rid of me was just another item on her to-do list. That night, after Andrew left again, after Margaret finally went home, I went through the house, checking every camera. I made sure the cloud storage was working. I made sure my password was strong. Then I sat in the nursery, in the rocking chair I had picked out myself, and I made a promise to my unborn child. I will protect you, I whispered into the darkness. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do, they will not hurt you. I thought I was prepared for anything. I was wrong. 3 weeks before my due date, the stress of everything I was carrying caught up with me. It was a Sunday morning. Andrew was supposedly playing golf. Margaret had invited herself over for brunch, as she did every Sunday, and I was making eggs and toast while she sat at my kitchen island, criticizing my choice of orange juice. Fresh squeezed is really the only acceptable option, she said, looking at the carton from Whole Foods, like it was something she had scraped off her shoe. But I suppose you weren't raised to know these things. I bit my tongue, smiled, kept cooking. Jennifer uses fresh squeezed, Margaret continued. She's quite a good cook, actually. Andrew says her eggs Benedict is exceptional. The mention of Jennifer made something twist in my stomach. I need to use the restroom, I said, setting down my spatula. I made it to the powder room before the cramps started. Sharp, intense. Different from the Braxton Hicks contractions I had been having for weeks. I grabbed the edge of the sink and tried to breathe through it. Another cramp, stronger this time. I looked down and saw blood. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. I stumbled back out to the kitchen. Margaret, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Something's wrong. I think I need to go to the hospital. She looked up from her phone with an expression of mild irritation. You're probably just being dramatic. First-time mothers always overreact. I'm bleeding, I said. This isn't normal. Please, I need to go now. Something flickered in her eyes. Something I couldn't quite read. Fine, she said. I'll call Andrew. There's no time. I need to go now. She made a show of looking for her car keys, taking her time. Every second, feeling like an eternity, while cramps tore through my body and blood soaked through my clothes. By the time we got to the hospital, I was in active labor, 3 weeks early. The emergency room was chaos. Nurses rushing, doctors being paged, someone putting an IV in my arm, while someone else checked the baby's heartbeat. Andrew arrived 2 hours later. He had been at Jennifer's apartment, I found out much later, not playing golf at all. He stood in the corner of my delivery room, phone in hand, looking more annoyed than concerned. The labor went on, and on, and on. 8 hours of contractions, 12 hours, 16 hours. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced, even in my years of nursing. It felt like my body was trying to tear itself apart from the inside. I begged for Andrew's hand, for his comfort, for anything. He stood in the corner, on his phone. Andrew, I gasped between contractions. Please, I need you. He didn't even look up. You're doing fine, he said. The doctors have it handled. Margaret sat in a chair by the window, checking her watch every few minutes, like she was waiting for something specific to happen. 16 hours and 37 minutes into labor, something did happen. I felt it before anyone else did, a warmth spreading beneath me, too much warmth, too fast. I opened my mouth to call for help. But the nurse was already there, her face going white as she looked at the monitors. She's hemorrhaging, she said, slamming her hand on the emergency button. Code blue. Code blue! After that, everything became a blur of alarms and shouting and people running. Dr. Morrison, the attending physician, appeared at my bedside. She's losing too much blood, he said. We need to operate now. My vision was starting to tunnel, the edges of the world going dark through the chaos. I heard Andrew's voice, clear, calm, making a choice that revealed everything about who he really was. Save the baby, he said. Whatever it takes, save the baby. Not save my wife, not save them both. Just the baby, the heir. Those were the last words I heard clearly before consciousness slipped away. And in that darkness, I thought it was over. I thought I was dead. I thought wrong. Death, it turns out, is not what I expected. There was no bright light, no tunnel, no loved ones waiting to welcome me to the other side. There was just darkness. Complete. Absolute. Like being at the bottom of the ocean with no sense of up or down. And then, slowly, sounds began to filter through. Muffled at first, distant, like hearing voices through thick glass. A beeping sound, steady, rhythmic, a heart monitor, I realized. My nursing training kicking in even in this strange twilight state. Voices. Professional. Tired. Time of death. 3:47 a.m. That was a man's voice. Dr. Morrison. I recognized his careful, measured tone. My mind screamed. I'm not dead. I'm right here. I can hear you. But nothing happened. My eyes wouldn't open. My mouth wouldn't work. My body was completely, terrifyingly unresponsive. The baby? That was a female voice. A nurse? Alive. Healthy girl. But the mother? Should we call it? Officially? Yes. She's gone. Gone. They thought I was gone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and tell them they were wrong. I was right there. I could hear everything. I was alive. But my body was a prison, and I was locked inside with no key. In nursing school, I had learned about this condition, locked-in syndrome. It's rare, affecting only a tiny fraction of patients who suffer certain types of brain injuries. The mind remains fully conscious, fully aware, but the body is completely paralyzed. The patient can hear everything, feel everything, understand everything that's happening around them. They just can't respond. They just can't tell anyone they're still alive. I had always thought it sounded like a nightmare. Now I was living it. They wheeled me out of the operating room. I felt the sheet being pulled over my face, the rough hospital linen scratching against my nose and lips. I felt the cold air of the hallway as they pushed my gurney through the hospital. Then the temperature dropped sharply. The morgue. Oh God. They were taking me to the morgue. The metal table was freezing against my back. I could feel every degree of that cold, but I couldn't shiver, couldn't react, couldn't do anything. A morgue attendant was humming somewhere nearby, moving around the room. I heard the clink of metal instruments being arranged. This is how it ends, I thought. They're going to cut me open. They're going to embalm me, and I'm going to feel every second of it. The terror was indescribable. Worse than the labor, worse than the hemorrhaging, worse than anything I had ever experienced. In 8 years of emergency nursing, I had seen death 100 times. I had held hands with dying patients and told them it would be peaceful, that they should let go, that there was nothing to be afraid of. I was wrong. There was everything to be afraid of. But then something happened. The morgue attendant stopped humming. "Wait," he said. "What the—" I felt his fingers on my wrist, then on my neck. Oh my God. Oh my God. His voice cracked with shock. "I've got a pulse. She's got a pulse." Chaos erupted. Running footsteps, shouting voices. The gurney moving again, rushing back through the hospital. I was alive, but no one knew I was aware. Dr. Morrison explained my condition to Andrew and Margaret a few hours later. I heard every word lying motionless in my hospital bed, machines beeping steadily around me. "Your wife survived the hemorrhaging," Dr. Morrison said, "but she experienced significant oxygen deprivation during the crisis. She's now in a deep coma. We call it a locked-in state." "What does that mean?" That was Andrew's voice, impatient, like my medical crisis was an inconvenience in his schedule. "It means she's completely unresponsive. She can't move, can't communicate, can't interact with the world in any way. However, there's a chance, maybe 10 to 15%, that she can hear and understand what's happening around her, even though she can't respond." "But she can't communicate?" Margaret's voice was sharp. "Can't move at all?" "No, she's completely paralyzed. So she's essentially a vegetable." I heard Dr. Morrison's discomfort in the pause that followed. "We don't use that term, Mrs. Cole. She's a patient in a coma. She could potentially recover." "What's the timeline?" Andrew asked. "How long could this last?" "Impossible to say. Days, weeks, months. Some patients remain in this state for years." There was a long silence. I imagined Margaret calculating, planning, adjusting her schemes. And if we decided to end the suffering? Her voice was cold, practical, like she was asking about putting down a sick dog. "What's the legal process?" After 30 days with no improvement, the family can petition to remove life support. A judge would need to approve it. 30 days? Margaret's voice was satisfied when she spoke again. That's manageable. Manageable. She was planning my murder, and she called it manageable. And there was nothing I could do but lie there and listen. Andrew came to my room that night, alone. He stood over my bed for a long moment. I couldn't see him, but I could feel his presence. Could smell his cologne, the expensive brand Jennifer had probably picked out for him. You had to make everything complicated, didn't you, Samantha? His voice was quiet, almost conversational, like he was talking to himself. You couldn't just go quietly. You couldn't just die like you were supposed to. Now, I have to wait 30 more days. He sighed. Mom says it'll be fine. Says we just have to be patient. Once they pull the plug, everything will be easier. Jennifer can move in officially. We can be a real family. She's so good with the baby already. The baby. My baby. I wanted to scream, to reach up and wrap my hands around his throat, to make him understand what he was doing. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but listen while my husband talked about replacing me like I was a piece of furniture that had gone out of style. The baby's beautiful, by the way, Andrew continued. Perfect. She looks just like me. Mom wants to name her Madison. I think that's nice. Better than Hope, anyway. That was your choice, wasn't it? Hope. Such a common name. Hope. I had wanted to name her Hope, because that's what she had been to me. Hope that Andrew would change. Hope that our marriage could be saved. Hope that we could be a real family. Hope was dead now, just like they thought I was. Andrew left without saying goodbye. And I lay there in the darkness, trapped in my useless body, while tears I couldn't wipe away rolled silently down my cheeks. The next 3 days were a special kind of hell. I learned things about my family that shattered whatever illusions I had been clinging to. I learned that Margaret had called my father on day 2, had told him I was dead, had told him they were planning a cremation, closed casket, very private funeral, had told him it would be too traumatic for him to come to Connecticut. My father had been mourning me for 3 days while I lay alive in a hospital bed a few hundred miles away. I learned that Jennifer had moved into my house. Not temporarily, permanently. One of the nurses was gossiping about it outside my door. Can you believe it? The nurse said. His wife isn't even dead yet, and the girlfriend's already setting up in the master bedroom. What kind of people do something like that? The kind of people who are planning to kill me, I wanted to say, but no sound came out. I learned that they were already calling my daughter Madison, already erasing the name I had chosen, already erasing me. And on day 3, I learned what they were celebrating. It was evening. I knew because the shift had changed, and the daytime nurses' chatter had been replaced by the quieter nighttime staff. I heard heels clicking in the hallway, Margaret's distinctive walk. She stopped outside my door, made a phone call. Yes, everything went perfectly, she said. Jennifer wore the dress, and it fit beautifully, very tasteful. Andrew's a bit squeamish about it all, but he'll come around. He always does when he realizes it's easier to go along. Yes, the party was lovely, small, just close family and a few friends. We toasted to new beginnings. Very appropriate, I thought. A party. They had thrown a party. We're already discussing the nursery, Margaret continued. Jennifer has wonderful taste. Sage green, she suggested. Very calming. Oh, and we've decided on the name officially. Madison Elizabeth Cole. After Richard's mother, yes, I know Samantha wanted Hope, but really, Hope is a word, not a name. This is much more appropriate for a Cole. I was screaming inside, screaming so loud I thought surely someone would hear, but my body stayed silent, still, dead to the world. 27 days until they can make it official, Margaret said. The lawyer says it should be straightforward. No living relatives who will object. Her father's been told she's already cremated, so there won't be any interference there. Yes, the life insurance is substantial. 500,000. That will cover the new nursery and still leave plenty for... Yes, exactly. Kill two birds with one stone, as they say. She laughed. Actually laughed. At her own joke about killing me. I'll stop by tomorrow to check on things, she said. Make sure the staff knows we want minimal intervention. No heroic measures. When the 30 days are up, I want this done quickly and cleanly. Yes. Perfect. Goodbye, dear. She hung up. Her heels clicked away down the hallway, and I lay there in my prison of flesh, knowing exactly what they were planning, exactly when they were going to do it, and completely unable to stop them. That was day 3. I had 27 days left to live, unless something changed, unless someone realized the truth, unless I found a way to fight back. Her name was Elena Vasquez. I didn't know that at first. Didn't know anything about her except the sound of her voice and the gentle way she adjusted my pillow and the kindness that radiated from her, even in the simplest actions. She entered my room around 11 o'clock on night 3. I had learned to track time by the shift changes, by the patterns of noise in the hallway, by the way the quality of light changed beyond my closed eyelids, even though I couldn't see it. Poor thing, she said softly, checking my vitals. I heard what happened. I heard about your family, too. She paused. I heard her pen scratching on a chart. That mother-in-law of yours was here earlier, asking about end-of-life procedures. 3 days after you delivered. What kind of people do something like that? She adjusted my blanket, smoothed the hair back from my forehead. I don't know if you can hear me, honey. The doctors say maybe you can, maybe you can't. But if you can, you fight, okay? Don't let them win. Don't let them win. Those 4 words broke something open inside me. For 3 days, I had been drowning in despair, trapped in my own body, listening to my death being planned. Watching my life being stolen piece by piece, I had been ready to give up, ready to just let it end. But Elena's voice, Elena's kindness, Elena's simple instruction to fight. It reminded me of something I had forgotten. I was Samantha Brennan, daughter of a cop, trained nurse, survivor, and Brennans don't quit. I focused every ounce of willpower I had on my right index finger, just that one finger, just one tiny movement to let her know I was in here. Move, I commanded. Move. Nothing happened. I tried again, and again, and again. Nothing. Elena finished her checks and left. I heard her footsteps receding down the hallway, but I didn't give up. Every night, when Elena came on shift, I tried to move. Every night, I failed, but I kept trying. On night 7, something changed. Elena came into my room for her usual checks. But this time, instead of the gentle small talk she usually offered, she sat down beside my bed. I've been watching you, she said quietly, watching your monitors. Your heart rate spikes sometimes, not randomly. It happens when certain people come into the room. When certain things are said, she paused. That's not typical for a patient who can't hear anything. My heart was pounding. Could she tell? Could she see it on the monitor? I'm going to try something, Elena said. I'm going to ask you some questions. If you can hear me, if you can understand, I need you to give me a sign, anything. A twitch, a flutter, just something to let me know you're in there. She took my hand. Can you hear me, Samantha? I focused everything I had on my finger, every ounce of concentration, every scrap of rage and fear and desperate hope. Move, move, please move. And then, barely perceptible, so slight it was almost invisible, my finger twitched against her palm. Elena gasped. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh, thank God. Okay, 1 twitch for yes, 2 for no. Can you do that? I twitched once. Can you hear what people say in your room? 1 twitch. Can you hear conversations from outside your room sometimes? One twitch. Elena was quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing, could feel her hand trembling slightly as she held mine. Did you hear what they said about the party? About Jennifer wearing your wedding dress? One twitch. Did you hear what your mother-in-law said about the 30 days? One twitch, and my heart monitor spiked violently. I am so sorry, Elena said. I am so sorry. But I need you to stay calm. I need you to keep fighting. Can you do that? One twitch. I'm going to try to help you, Elena said. I don't know how yet, but I promise I'm not going to let them do this to you. You're not alone anymore. I wasn't alone. For the first time in 7 days, I wasn't alone. Over the next week, Elena and I developed a system. She couldn't spend too much time in my room without raising suspicions, so we had to be careful. But every night during her shift, she would come in for her routine checks and stay a few extra minutes to communicate with me. The alphabet system took forever, but it worked. She would point to letters, and I would twitch when she hit the right one. It was agonizing, exhausting. Each word took several minutes to spell out, but slowly, painstakingly, I told her what I needed her to know. D, a D, M, A, R, C, U, S, E, N, N, A, N, O, H, I, O, your dad, Elena said. Marcus Brennan, in Ohio. I'll find him. The next night, she came in looking shaken. I found your father, she said. I called him today. Samantha, he thinks you're dead. Margaret told him you were cremated 3 days after delivery. He's been mourning you for a week. The rage that surged through me was so intense, my heart monitor went haywire. I told him the truth, Elena continued quickly. I told him you're alive, that you're in a coma, that you can hear everything. I told him about the 30-day deadline. I told him he needs to come. She paused. He's driving here tonight, 12 hours from Ohio. He should be here by morning. My father was coming. My father knew I was alive. For the first time since I woke up in this nightmare, I felt something like hope. But hope, I was learning, was a dangerous thing. Marcus Brennan arrived at St. Catherine's Hospital at 8 o'clock the next morning. Day 8. I heard him at the reception desk, heard his voice, that familiar gruff tone that had tucked me in at night as a child and walked me down the aisle at my wedding. I'm here to see my daughter, he said. Samantha Cole. She's in the ICU. The receptionist's voice was professionally apologetic. Let me check the visitor list. I'm sorry, sir. You're not on the approved visitor list. What? I'm her father. I understand, sir, but the family has restricted visitors to immediate family only. I am immediate family. I'm sorry, sir. The husband and mother-in-law are listed as the decision-makers. You're not authorized. The decision-makers. Margaret had made sure my own father couldn't see me. I heard the desperation rising in his voice. Listen to me. My daughter is alive in there. They told me she was dead. They lied to me. I need to see her. I need to see her right now. Sir, please calm down. I will not calm down. My daughter is being held prisoner in there, and you're telling me I can't see her? I heard a commotion, heard him pushing past the desk, heard security being called, and then his voice, echoing down the hallway, getting closer to my room. Samantha, baby girl, can you hear me? I'm here. Daddy's here. He was so close, just feet away from my door. Then I heard the sounds of a struggle, of security guards restraining him, of handcuffs clicking shut. Let go of me. My daughter is alive. She's alive, and they're trying to kill her. They dragged him away. I heard his voice getting fainter, heard him still shouting my name, heard the hospital doors closing behind him, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't tell him I was right there. I couldn't tell him I had heard every word. All I could do was lie there, tears streaming down my face, while they took my father away in handcuffs. That night, Elena came to my room with devastating news. "Your father was arrested for trespassing," she said quietly. "He posted bail, but he's been officially banned from the hospital. If he comes back, they'll arrest him again." I twitched frantically, tried to communicate my desperation. "He's not giving up," Elena said quickly. "He told me to tell you that. He said Brennans don't quit. He's contacting lawyers. He's calling in every favor he has from 30 years as a cop. He's going to find a way to fight this." But the next words from her lips made my blood run cold. "There's something else. I overheard something today, in the cafeteria." She hesitated. "They were talking about the baby, about your baby." My heart rate spiked. "There are two of them, Samantha. You had twins. Two girls. Twins? I didn't understand. How could there be two? All my ultrasounds had shown one baby." "Just one." "The second one was hidden behind the first," Elena explained. "It happens sometimes. She was in distress during delivery. They rushed her to the NICU immediately. She's been there for 8 days. 8 days. My daughter had been alive for 8 days, and no one had told me. But that's not the worst part." Elena's voice dropped even lower. "They're planning to sell her, the second baby." I heard Margaret on the phone. A private adoption, $150,000. No paper trail. The world tilted around me. Sell her? They were going to sell my daughter. "One baby makes Andrew look like a sympathetic widower," Elena continued. "But two babies raises questions. Why wasn't the second one mentioned? Why was she hidden? Margaret called her a loose end. A loose end. My daughter was a loose end to be disposed of. The rage that flooded through me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It burned through my paralysis, through my despair, through everything. I had been ready to die, ready to give up, ready to let them win. But my daughters needed me, both of them, and I was going to save them, no matter what it took. My father was relentless. Elena gave me updates every night during her shift. Marcus Brennan, retired homicide detective, was waging a one-man war against the Cole family empire. He contacted every lawyer friend he had, filed emergency petitions for visitation rights, called in favors from 30 years of police work. He hired a private investigator to document Jennifer living in my house. The PI got photos of her, wearing my clothes, driving my car, sleeping in my bed. By day 12, the evidence was mounting. Financial records showed Andrew had transferred $200,000 from our joint accounts to a personal account Jennifer had access to. Hospital records, leaked by a sympathetic administrator Elena had found, showed I was not brain dead. I had measurable brain activity. The locked-in diagnosis meant I could potentially recover. By day 14, Marcus had enough to get a judge's attention. The judge granted him emergency visitation rights. A Child Protective Services investigation was opened regarding both babies. The sympathetic hospital administrator agreed to review my case independently. On day 15, my father finally walked into my room. I couldn't see him, but I felt his presence the moment he entered. Smelled his familiar scent, Old Spice and coffee, that had meant safety and love my entire life. Elena was there with him. "Talk to her," Elena said softly. "She can hear you." My father sat down beside my bed, took my hand in his. His hands were rough, calloused from decades of hard work. They trembled slightly as they wrapped around my fingers. "Baby girl," his voice cracked. "It's Daddy. I'm here now. I'm not leaving. You hear me? I'm never leaving." I focused everything I had on my fingers, squeezed as hard as I could. It wasn't much, a slight pressure, a tiny movement, but he felt it. "I feel that," he choked out. "I feel you. Oh God, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't here, but I'm here now, and I'm going to get you out of this, I promise." He stayed for an hour, talked to me the whole time, told me about his drive from Ohio, about the lawyers he had contacted, about the evidence he was gathering. "We're going to beat them," he said. "I've put murderers in prison for 30 years. I know how to build a case. I know how to find the evidence that matters. And I've got more than enough on these people to put them away for a long, long time." For the first time in 15 days, I believed him. I believed we might actually win. I was wrong. Margaret Cole had not built her empire by losing gracefully. On day 16, everything started to crumble. The sympathetic hospital administrator who had agreed to review my case was suddenly transferred to another facility, effective immediately, no explanation given. The judge who had granted my father visitation rights recused himself from the case. Conflict of interest, he claimed. No one could explain what conflict that might be. My father's private investigator was arrested for trespassing at an apartment Jennifer wasn't supposed to have. Someone had set him up. On day 17, my father received an envelope with no return address. Inside were photographs. Compromising photographs of him with a woman who was definitely not family. Elena told me about them that night. "They're fake," she said. "Your father says they're AI generated, but they're convincing. And they came with a note. Back off, or these go to every news outlet in the country." I wanted to scream, to rage, to find some way to fight back. But I was trapped, helpless, able to do nothing but listen while Margaret dismantled everything my father had built. Day 18, his lawyer dropped the case. No explanation. Day 18, the CPS investigation was closed. Insufficient evidence. Day 18, 2 men in expensive suits visited my father at his hotel and suggested very strongly that he should return to Ohio, that Connecticut was not a healthy place for a man his age. And on day 19, they tried to kill him. My father was driving to the hospital when another car ran him off the road. His vehicle flipped 3 times. He survived. Barely. Broken arm, concussion, internal bleeding that required emergency surgery. He was hospitalized at a facility 50 miles away, unable to walk, unable to fight, unable to save me. Elena came to my room that night. I could hear that she had been crying. "I don't know how to tell you this," she said. "Your father was in an accident. He's alive. But he's hurt badly. He won't be able to come for a while." My heart monitor went crazy. My body tried to respond, tried to move, tried to scream. Nothing happened. They had tried to kill my father, the only person fighting for me. And I was lying there, helpless, unable to do anything but listen and rage and pray. Margaret visited my room on day 22, 8 days until they could legally pull the plug. She sat in the chair beside my bed, crossed her legs, perfectly composed, as always, in her designer clothes and expensive jewelry. "Can you hear me in there, Samantha?" Her voice was conversational, almost friendly. "I don't really care, either way. But if you can, I want you to know something." She paused. I heard her checking her nails. "Your father was warned. He didn't listen. The accident was a message. The next one won't be an accident. It'll be a funeral. His, unless he stays away." Cold fury flooded through me. "Now about your babies," Margaret continued. "Madison, that's what we're calling her now, is doing wonderfully. Jennifer is such a natural mother, better than you would have been, honestly. Less emotional." She stood. I heard her heels clicking on the floor as she walked around to my bed. "The other one, baby number 2, well, she's being picked up tomorrow. A lovely couple from California. Very wealthy, they've already paid $150,000. Your daughter is worth quite a lot, it seems. Tomorrow." They were selling my daughter tomorrow. "In 8 days," Margaret continued, "Andrew will sign the papers to remove your life support. There will be a lovely funeral. very tasteful. And then Jennifer will formally adopt Madison. They'll marry after a respectable mourning period, and your daughter will grow up calling Jennifer Mommy. She'll never know you existed." She leaned close to my ear. Her perfume was suffocating, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. She left, and I lay there in the darkness, drowning in despair. But Margaret had made one crucial mistake. She thought I was helpless. She thought I had no weapons left. She forgot about the cameras. Elena came to my room that night. I could hear that she was terrified. Her voice was shaking. Her hands trembled as she took mine. "Samantha, they're coming for your second baby tomorrow. We're out of time. Your father can't help. The police won't help." I don't know what to do. I twitched frantically, needed her to get the alphabet paper. She understood, grabbed the paper, started pointing to letters. Slowly, agonizingly, I spelled out CAMERASHOMECLOU DIDAPASSWORDHOPE 2023. Elena's eyes went wide. "You have cameras at your house in the cloud?" One twitch. "Oh my God." She grabbed her phone. I heard her fingers tapping on the screen. "Hope 2023. I'm logging in." "Oh my God. Oh my God. What is it? What do you see?" She was talking to herself now, scrolling through footage. "Everything. It's everything. Jennifer and Andrew in your bed. Margaret visiting, the party. They're wearing your wedding dress. They're talking about removing you. They're planning—" She stopped. "Samantha, you brilliant, brilliant woman. You got them. You got all of them. The cameras I had installed months ago. Preparing for a divorce I never got to file. The cameras that had been recording everything since the day I went into labor. They had captured it all. Elena sent the footage to my father that night. All of it. Every file in the cloud storage. The next morning, day 23, she drove to the hospital where Marcus was recovering. I don't know exactly what happened there. Elena told me about it later, after everything was over. But this is what I understand. My father was lying in a hospital bed, arm in a cast, bandages wrapped around his head, from the concussion. He should have been resting, should have been recovering. Instead, he was sitting up, making phone calls. When Elena showed him the footage on her phone, his face went through a transformation. Shock, then rage, then something colder, harder. The face of a detective who had spent 30 years putting murderers behind bars. "I still have friends," he told Elena. "Real friends, not the ones Margaret can buy." He picked up his phone. "Danny? It's Marcus." "Yeah, I know. Listen, I need a favor, the biggest one I've ever asked. I've got a kidnapping in progress, conspiracy to commit murder, and trafficking a newborn. And I've got it all on video. Can you get FBI involved?" He paused, listened. "Yeah, I'm serious. I'll send you the files right now." Day 23, afternoon. I was lying in my bed, as always, unable to move, unable to speak, waiting to die. And then I heard something I had never heard before. The sound of boots in the hallway. Many boots, moving fast and purposefully. Federal agents. This is a restricted area. A nurse's voice, startled. "What's happening?" "Who are you?" "FBI. We're here regarding an ongoing investigation." More boots. More voices. Chaos in the hallway. And then, cutting through all of it, Margaret's voice. Shrill. Furious. "What is the meaning of this? Do you know who I am? Ma'am, I need you to step away from that room. That's my daughter-in-law's room. I have every right to be here, but you, ma'am, you are not to enter that room. We have reason to believe a crime is in progress." "A crime? This is outrageous. I'll have your badge for this. Ma'am, step away. Now." The sound of a struggle. Of Margaret being restrained. "Get your hands off me." My lawyers will hear about this. The door to my room opened. Someone entered. Mrs. Cole? Samantha Cole? A man's voice. Professional, authoritative. I'm Special Agent Daniel Foster with the FBI. I don't know if you can hear me, ma'am, but you're safe now. We have evidence of a conspiracy involving your family members. Your babies are being placed under protective custody as we speak. I wanted to cry, wanted to laugh, wanted to scream with relief. My babies were safe, both of them. Your father is on his way, Agent Foster continued. He's been instrumental in bringing this case to our attention. He'll be here within the hour. My father, my impossible, stubborn, wonderful father. He had done it, against all odds, against the Cole family money and power and influence. He had saved us, or so I thought. Marcus arrived at the hospital 45 minutes later. Against medical advice, he had checked himself out of his own hospital, driven 50 miles with a broken arm and a concussion, and walked into my room under FBI escort. We got them, baby girl. His voice was thick with emotion. We got them. The FBI has the videos. They can't hurt you anymore. They can't take your babies. It's over. My heart monitor showed steady, calm rhythms for the first time in 23 days. I allowed myself to believe it was over. I was wrong. Day 24. Morning. FBI Agent Foster came to deliver news. I heard his conversation with my father outside my room. Mr. Brennan, the evidence is strong for the baby trafficking charge. We caught Mrs. Cole's associates with the cash. We have the recordings. That part is solid. My father's voice was wary. But for the attempted murder, pulling the plug on a coma patient, it's more complicated. Mrs. Cole hasn't actually done anything yet. She's expressed intent, but intent isn't action. So what does that mean? It means Margaret Cole made bail this morning. $2 million. She's out. Silence. There's more, Agent Foster continued. She's already filed an emergency petition to be reinstated as Samantha's medical proxy. What? How is that possible? The judge granted a temporary restraining order against you, based on your erratic behavior, the trespassing arrest, the accident. Mrs. Cole's lawyers argued that you're not mentally fit to make medical decisions for your daughter. Until there's a hearing, which is scheduled for day 31, Mrs. Cole retains medical proxy rights. Day 31, one day after the 30-day deadline. Margaret could still kill me, legally, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop her. The next 6 days were the longest of my life. Margaret couldn't sell the baby anymore. The FBI was watching, but she could still pull the plug on me. She hired a team of lawyers, filed motions, made arguments. On day 28, she found a doctor willing to help her. His name was William Hayes, 58 years old. Significant gambling debts. Willing to do anything for the right price. Dr. Hayes came to my room that afternoon, performed an examination. The patient shows no measurable brain activity, he wrote in his report. It is my professional opinion that she meets the criteria for brain death. It was a lie. Elena knew it. My father knew it. Anyone who had seen my heart rate spike when Margaret entered the room knew it. But Dr. Hayes' signature was on the paper, and that paper was all Margaret needed. Day 29. The Hospital Ethics Board, pressured by Cole family lawyers and intimidated by Cole family money, approved life support removal, scheduled for day 30, 6 a.m. My father filed emergency motions. Denied. Elena threatened to go to the press. She was fired immediately, escorted off hospital premises by security. I'm so sorry, she said, standing over my bed one last time. I tried everything, but I can't be here tomorrow. They won't let me. You have to fight, Samantha. You have to wake up. Please. Then she was gone. Day 29. The last night of my life. Elena was gone. My father was banned from the hospital. My babies were somewhere safe, but I would never hold them. I had fought for 29 days, and I had lost. In 8 hours, they would turn off the machines, and I would die. For real this time. The hospital was quiet. Outside my window, the world was preparing for another ordinary day. People sleeping in their beds, cars parked in their driveways, the moon moving slowly across the sky. Inside my room, machines beeped steadily. Monitors tracked vital signs that would soon be silenced forever. I had been fighting for 29 days, 29 days of trying to move, 29 days of trying to speak, 29 days of screaming inside my head while my body refused to respond. And I had failed. I thought about giving up, just letting go. It would be easier. No more pain, no more helplessness, no more listening to them plan my death, just peace. Then I heard something, a phone. Someone had left a phone in my room, probably a nurse who had dropped it during the chaos of Elena being escorted out. It rang, once, twice, then voicemail picked up. And I heard my father's voice. "Baby girl, I don't know if you can hear this." He sounded exhausted, broken, but I want you to know, your daughters are safe. Both of them. I'm holding them right now. A pause. I heard a baby cooing in the background, and they're beautiful, Samantha. So beautiful. They have your eyes. His voice cracked. I've been talking to them about you. Every day. I tell them their mommy is the strongest, bravest woman in the world. And she's fighting to come back to them. He was crying now. Please, sweetheart. Please come back. They need you. I need you. Don't let them win. Don't let them take you from us. A long pause. You're a Brennan, goddammit. And Brennans don't quit. We don't ever quit. Another pause. I love you, baby girl. Fight! Fight! The message ended. And something inside me ignited. My daughters. My father had my daughters. They were safe. They were waiting for me. I was not going to die in this bed. I was not going to let Margaret Cole win. I was not going to let my daughters grow up without their mother. I focused everything I had on my right hand. Move, move, move. Nothing. I tried again. Move. Nothing. Again. Move. A twitch, the barest flutter of my fingers. Again. Move. More movement. My hand was responding. I kept fighting. For hours. Through the night. While the clock ticked down towards 6 a.m. and the machines beeped steadily, and the nurses made their rounds without noticing the battle being waged inside room 412, 5 a.m. 1 hour until they pulled the plug. My fingers were moving consistently now. Small movements, weak but real. 5:30 a.m. 30 minutes. I could feel my toes, could sense my body starting to wake up from whatever prison it had been locked in. 5:45 a.m. 15 minutes. A nurse entered to prep the room for the procedure. She was checking the machines, making notes on her clipboard, when my hand moved. Not a twitch. A real movement. My fingers closed around the bed rail. The clipboard clattered to the floor. "Oh my God!" the nurse screamed. "Oh my God! She's moving! Call the doctor! She's moving!" The room erupted into chaos. Doctors rushed in. Nurses flooded through the door. Someone was checking my pupils with a flashlight. Someone else was calling for additional equipment. And then, through the chaos, I heard Margaret's voice. "What's happening? Why isn't she disconnected yet?" She was here, ready to watch me die, Mrs. Cole, Dr. Morrison said. Something has changed. Samantha is showing signs of consciousness. We can't proceed. That's impossible. She was declared brain dead. By Dr. Hayes. Not by me. And I'm looking at a patient who just moved her hand voluntarily. Margaret pushed into the room. I was lying in my bed. but my eyes were open, and I was looking directly at her. "Hello, Margaret?" My voice was hoarse, barely audible, but clear. Margaret stumbled backward like she had been shot. "That's not possible," she whispered. I heard everything. My voice grew stronger with each word. Every single word. For 30 days, Andrew appeared in the doorway behind his mother. His face went white. "Hello, husband." "Surprised to see me?" The next few hours were a blur of tests and examinations and disbelief. Dr. Morrison couldn't explain it. None of them could. "Patients in locked-in states sometimes recovered," he said. "But not like this. Not this fast. Not at the exact moment they needed to." But I knew why I had woken up. I had woken up because my daughters needed me. I had woken up because my father had told me to fight. I had woken up because Brennans don't quit. By noon, I could speak in full sentences. By evening, I was giving my statement to the FBI. "I have video evidence of everything," I told Agent Foster. "Hidden cameras in my home. Cloud storage. Password protected. They captured the affair. The conspiracy. The plans to sell my daughter. Everything. Mrs. Cole, your evidence has already been submitted by your father, but your testimony as a conscious victim makes this an airtight case. What happens now? Margaret Cole is being charged with conspiracy to commit murder, child trafficking, and fraud. Andrew Cole is being charged with conspiracy, abandonment, and child trafficking. Jennifer Ashworth is being charged as an accessory, and Dr. Hayes is being charged with fraud and attempted murder. And my daughters? Both are safe. They're in temporary custody with your father. Given the circumstances, we expect you'll have full custody within days." I closed my eyes. My daughters were safe. I was alive. We had won. But the fight wasn't over yet. 2 days after I woke up, I asked to see Andrew. The FBI allowed it. Supervised. They thought it might be useful to have his reaction on record. They brought him to my hospital room in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. He had aged 10 years in 48 hours. His face was gaunt. His eyes were hollow. The confident, charming man I had married was gone, replaced by someone broken and small. "Samantha," he started. "I don't want..." I looked at him, really looked at him, tried to find something, anything, of the man I had fallen in love with. I couldn't. "I want to understand something," I said. "When did you decide to kill me? Was it before or after you found out I was pregnant?" "I didn't decide anything. It wasn't my idea. Mom said..." Your mother said, "Your mother decided, and you just went along, because it was easier, like you always do. I never wanted to hurt you. You were going to let them turn off my life support, Andrew. You were going to sell our daughter. You celebrated with your mistress while I lay dead in a hospital bed. You never wanted to hurt me?" He had no answer, couldn't meet my eyes. "I have one question, Andrew, just one. Did you ever love me, even a little, even in the beginning?" Long pause, his hands twisted together in his lap. I thought I did." I nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. Goodbye, Andrew." I gestured to the guards. They took him away. I didn't cry. I was done crying for him. Margaret's preliminary hearing was held 5 days after I woke up. I wasn't well enough to attend in person, but Elena, who had been hired back immediately after my awakening, brought me a live feed on her phone. Margaret arrived at the courthouse in designer clothes and expensive jewelry, flanked by her team of lawyers, still believing, somehow, that her money would save her. "Your Honor," her lawyer argued, "my client is a respected member of this community. These charges are exaggerated, based on the testimony of a woman who claims she could hear while in a coma. That is a medically dubious claim at best." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, we have video evidence. Hours of it. Recorded by cameras, Mrs. Samantha Cole installed in her own home. We have recordings of the defendant discussing how to make problems disappear. We have recordings of the defendant arranging the sale of an infant for $150,000. We have recordings of the defendant plotting to remove her daughter-in-law's life support. She handed a tablet to the judge. I would like to play a brief excerpt for the court. The video started. Margaret's voice filled the courtroom. In 8 days, Andrew will sign the papers to remove your life support. There will be a lovely funeral, very tasteful. And then Jennifer will formally adopt Madison. They'll marry after a respectable mourning period, and your daughter will grow up calling Jennifer Mommy. She'll never know you existed. The recording continued. And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. The judge's face was stone. Mrs. Margaret Cole, based on the evidence presented, I am denying bail. You are remanded to custody pending trial. Margaret's composure cracked. You can't do this? Do you know who I am? Do you know who my family is? I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Cole, the judge said coldly. You're a defendant in a criminal case, and in my courtroom, that's all that matters. Bailiff. They led her away in handcuffs, screaming, cursing, completely undone. The woman who had orchestrated my murder, who had planned to sell my daughter, who had thought herself untouchable, was finally being held accountable. Elena squeezed my hand. You did it, she said. You actually did it. No, I said. We did it. All of us. The trials took place 6 months later. Margaret Cole was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, child trafficking, assault, and fraud. The assault charge was for my father's car accident. The prosecution proved she had hired the men who ran him off the road. Sentence: 25 years, no parole. She was 63 years old. She would die in prison. Andrew Cole was convicted of conspiracy, child trafficking, fraud, and abandonment. Sentence: 15 years. He lost all parental rights. Permanently. The man who had stood over my hospital bed and complained that I hadn't died fast enough would spend the next 15 years in a cell. Jennifer Ashworth was convicted as accessory to child trafficking and fraud. Sentence: 7 years. The woman who had tried on my wedding dress while I lay dying, who had called my daughter hers, who had slept in my bed and worn my clothes, would spend 7 years behind bars. Dr. William Hayes, who had falsely declared me brain dead in exchange for Margaret's money, had his medical license revoked. Sentence: 10 years. Justice was served. It didn't undo the 30 days of hell. It didn't heal the trauma. It didn't give me back the time I had lost. But it was something. Day 45, after I woke up, I was finally well enough to leave the hospital. My father drove me to his house. He had moved from Ohio to Connecticut after everything happened. Bought a small house 2 miles from the hospital. Set up 2 cribs in his living room. He had been taking care of my daughters for over a month. The house was modest. Nothing like the Cole mansion. A 2-bedroom with a small yard and a porch that needed painting. It was perfect. I walked inside on unsteady legs, and there they were. 2 matching cribs, 2 tiny faces, identical, perfect. This one is, my father started, then stopped. Well, you never named the second one. I picked up the first baby, the one Margaret had called Madison. Her name is Hope, I said. It was always Hope. I picked up the second baby, and this is Grace, because Grace is what saved us. I held them both, one in each arm, 2 little girls who had almost been taken from me, and I cried. Not sad tears, not angry tears. Relief, joy, love. Hi, my babies, I whispered. Mommy's here. Mommy's finally here. The first year after everything happened was the hardest of my life. Not because of the physical recovery, though that was difficult enough. My body had been through trauma that most people couldn't imagine. Weeks of bed rest, months of physical therapy, years of lingering effects that the doctors said might never fully go away. No, the hardest part was the psychological recovery. I had nightmares every night for the first 6 months. I would wake up paralyzed, convinced I was back in that hospital bed, unable to move, unable to scream, listening to Margaret plan my death. Sometimes I would wake up and not be able to move for real. Sleep paralysis, my therapist called it, a common symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. My brain was replaying the trauma, trying to process it, trying to integrate it into something that made sense. But it didn't make sense. None of it made sense. How could the man I married have stood over my bed and wished I would die faster? How could his mother have plotted to sell my daughter like property? How could people be so cruel, so calculating, so utterly without conscience? I didn't have answers to those questions. I still don't. What I had was my daughters, Hope and Grace. They were my reason to get out of bed every morning, my reason to keep pushing through the nightmares and the flashbacks, and the moments when the walls closed in and I couldn't breathe. They needed me, and I refused to let them down. My father was my rock during that first year. He had sold his house in Ohio and moved permanently to Connecticut. He was 62 years old, still recovering from his own injuries, and he threw himself into being a grandfather with the same determination he had once brought to being a homicide detective. He changed diapers at 3 a.m. He walked the floor with crying babies when I was too exhausted to stand. He made bottles and did laundry and handled all the practical details that I couldn't manage in those early, dark months. When I thanked him, he just shrugged. "Brennans take care of each other," he said. "That's what we do." Elena became part of our family too. She had been fired from St. Catherine's Hospital for helping me. Her career, her income, her stability, all sacrificed because she had chosen to do the right thing. I couldn't let that stand. 6 months after the trials ended, I published a book about my experience. 30 Days Dead, I called it. The story of how I survived locked-in syndrome, betrayal, and attempted murder. It became a bestseller almost immediately. The publicity was overwhelming. Interview requests flooded in. Documentary offers, movie rights. Everyone wanted to hear about the woman who had heard her own death planned and lived to see her killers brought to justice. I used the money from the book to start a foundation, the Hope and Grace Foundation, named after my daughters. Our mission was simple: advocating for patients who couldn't advocate for themselves, people in comas, people with locked-in syndrome, people whose families were making decisions that might not be in their best interests. My first hire was Elena. "I want you to run the medical advocacy program," I told her. "You'll be helping people like me, people who can't speak for themselves. You'll be their voice." "Samantha," she said, tears streaming down her face, "I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll help me help others. Say you'll never let anyone die alone and unheard again." Yes. Yes, of course, yes. We hugged. Two women who had been through hell together, who had fought against impossible odds and won, who had become family in the truest sense of the word. 3 years after the trials ended, Margaret Cole died in prison. Stroke. Sudden. No one was with her. I found out through a phone call from the prison chaplain. He thought I might want to know. I sat with the news for a long time. The woman who had orchestrated my near murder, who had planned to sell my daughter, who had destroyed my marriage and almost destroyed my father, who had haunted my nightmares for 3 years. She was gone. I expected to feel something: relief, satisfaction, maybe even joy. What I felt was nothing. She had tried to erase me from existence, and now she was the one who had been erased. There was a certain justice in that, I suppose. That weekend, I drove to the prison cemetery where she had been buried. It was a cold November day, the kind of day where the wind cuts through your coat and the sky is the color of slate, the kind of day that makes you think about mortality and meaning and all the things we spend our lives running from. Margaret's grave was simple. A small headstone with her name and dates. No beloved mother, no cherished grandmother, just Margaret Elizabeth Cole, 1961 to 2027. No one had written anything else because there was nothing else to say. I stood there for a long moment. My daughters were at home with my father. Elena was running the foundation. Life was continuing on without Margaret Cole, just as it had continued on without me during those 30 days when everyone thought I was dead. I placed a single white rose on her grave, not out of respect, not out of forgiveness. I placed it there so that if her spirit was watching, she would know that I had won, that her granddaughters would never know her name, that everything she had tried to build had been destroyed by me, the daughter-in-law she had tried to kill. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. 5 years after I woke from the coma, I visited Andrew in prison. It was the first time I had seen him since his sentencing, the first time I had looked into the eyes of the man who had stood over my hospital bed and complained that I hadn't died fast enough. The prison visiting room was cold and institutional, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Guards stationed at every door, other families having their own difficult conversations at tables around us. Andrew was 52 now, gray, gaunt. The expensive confidence he had worn like armor was completely gone. Prison had stripped away everything that had once made him charming, leaving behind something hollow and broken. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was different too, smaller, uncertain. "I came to tell you something," I said, "not to hear your apology." I wasn't going to apologize. He looked at his hands. "I know it wouldn't mean anything." "You're right, it wouldn't." Silence stretched between us. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the space where words should have been. "How are they?" Andrew finally asked. "The girls? They're 5 now. Smart. Happy. Loved? Do they know about me?" They asked about their father once. When they were 3. I told them their father went away, and he's never coming back. They haven't asked since. His face crumbled. "Samantha, please, when I get out, 10 years from now, could I maybe see them? Just once?" I looked at him for a long moment. "No, please." "They're my daughters, too." "No, Andrew, they're not. You sold one of them. You were going to let the other one grow up calling your mistress Mommy. You don't get to be their father. Not now, not ever." I stood up. "I hope you find some kind of peace in here. I really do. But you need to understand something. When you get out in 10 years, you will have nothing. No family, no money, no home. Your mother's estate went to legal fees. Your reputation is destroyed. You will be 52 years old with nothing." "I know," he said quietly. "Good. Remember that. Every single day for the next 10 years. Remember that you had everything. A wife who loved you, daughters who would have adored you, a family. And you threw it all away because your mother told you to. That's your legacy, Andrew. That's all you'll ever be." I walked out without looking back. I never saw him again. He was released 10 years later, at 52 years old. No family waiting for him, no money, no home. His mother's estate had been consumed by legal battles and settlements. He died 3 years after that, alone, in a rented room in a small town where no one knew his name. The obituary listed no surviving family. A month after my visit to Andrew, I received a letter. It was from Jennifer Ashworth, written from prison. She had served 5 years of her 7-year sentence and was approaching her parole hearing. I read it at my kitchen table on a quiet Sunday morning while Hope and Grace ate breakfast and argued about cartoons. Samantha, she wrote, I know you'll probably throw this away without reading it. I wouldn't blame you, but I need to say this, even if no one hears it. I was wrong about everything. I told myself you were the villain, the woman standing between Andrew and his true love. I told myself I deserved what you had. I told myself you wouldn't really be hurt because you didn't appreciate what you had. I was a fool. Andrew never loved me. He never loved anyone except himself. And Margaret? She used me like a tool and threw me away the moment I wasn't useful. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking you to know you won completely. I had 7 years in here to understand what I did, and I have to live with it forever. I hope your daughters never know my name. I hope they grow up happy and loved and free. I hope they become everything I'll never be. Goodbye, Samantha. I won't write again. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and dropped it in the trash. There was nothing to say, no response to give. She had made her choices. Now she had to live with them, just like all of us. That October, on a Sunday morning that could have been any Sunday morning in any ordinary life, I walked into my kitchen to find controlled chaos. Hope and Grace were 5 years old now, old enough to have opinions about everything, old enough to argue and laugh and ask a million questions a day. They were eating pancakes, syrup everywhere. More on their faces than in their mouths. My father was at the stove, 66 years old, still walking with a limp from the accident that had nearly killed him 5 years ago. Still the strongest man I had ever known. Elena had stopped by with coffee. She did that most Sunday mornings now. She had become family in every way that mattered. Grandpa, Hope demanded, more chocolate chips. More chocolate chips? You've already got more chocolate chips than pancake. More, Grace echoed. More, more, more. I stood in the doorway and watched. My father, my friend, my daughters. Everything I had almost lost. Everything I had fought to keep. You know what I was thinking about this morning? Elena asked, handing me a cup of coffee. What? That first night, when I heard them talking about selling the baby, I almost didn't believe what I was hearing. I remember. I couldn't believe it either. And I was living it. Look at us now. I looked around my kitchen. The chaos, the laughter, the love. Yeah. Look at us now. That evening, I sat on my back porch, watching Hope and Grace chase fireflies in the fading light. The golden hour. That brief window when the world looks softer, kinder, more forgiving than it has any right to be. People ask me if I've forgiven them. Margaret, Andrew, Jennifer. The answer is no, and I'm not ashamed of that. Forgiveness isn't something you owe the people who tried to destroy you. Forgiveness is a gift. And some people don't deserve gifts. Margaret wanted to erase me from my own life. She wanted my daughters to grow up calling another woman mommy. She wanted to sell one of my babies like property. And she wanted to kill me. Legally, quietly, completely. She failed. Andrew wanted the easy path. The affair without consequences. The babies without the wife. The inheritance without the obligation. He wanted to have everything without earning any of it. He got nothing. Jennifer wanted my life, my house, my husband, my child. She thought she could step into my shoes and no one would notice the difference. She found out the hard way. You can't steal someone else's life. You can only destroy your own. Hope ran up to me, hands cupped carefully. Mommy, I caught a firefly. Look. She opened her hands, just a crack. A tiny light glowed inside. Oh, honey, it's beautiful. But you know what? Fireflies need to be free. They need to fly and shine for everyone to see, but I want to keep it. I know, baby. But sometimes the best thing we can do is let go. Let it shine its own light. Hope thought about it. 5 years old and already so wise. Then she opened her hands. The firefly rose into the evening air, glowing, free. Bye-bye, Firefly, Hope called. Grace ran over, breathless and excited. Mommy, will you catch fireflies with us? I smiled, stood up. Yeah, baby, let's catch fireflies. I walked into the yard with my daughters. They wanted me dead. They wanted my daughters. They wanted everything I had and everything I loved. But they forgot one thing. You don't bury a mother. You plant her, and she grows back. Stronger, fiercer, more alive than ever. My name is Samantha Brennan. I died for 30 days, and I came back for everything they tried to take. Hope and Grace ran ahead of me through the fireflies, laughing, free. This was my life now. Messy, beautiful, nothing like what I had planned, but it was mine, all mine, and no one would ever take it from me again. 20 years later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday in April. It was addressed to Hope and Grace Brennan, and it came from a law office in Hartford. The return address included the name of a firm I didn't recognize. My daughters were 25 years old. Both had graduated from nursing school, following in my footsteps. Both were working at hospitals now, saving lives the way I once had before marriage and betrayal and locked-in syndrome changed everything. They came to dinner every Sunday, just like I had once gone to dinner at my father's house. Just like he now came to mine, 86 years old and still going strong, still flipping pancakes for his great-grandchildren. When Hope and Grace brought their families over, that Tuesday evening, my daughters sat at my kitchen table and opened the letter together. It was from an attorney, explaining that he had been retained by Andrew Cole before his death, instructed to send this letter to his daughters on the 20th anniversary of the day their mother woke up. There was a second envelope inside, handwritten, addressed simply, to my daughters. Hope looked at me. Should we read it? That's your choice, I said. I won't tell you what to do. They looked at each other, communicated the way twins do, in glances and half gestures that mean nothing to outsiders and everything to them. Then Grace opened the envelope. Dear Hope and Grace, she read aloud, by the time you read this, I will have been dead for many years. I don't know if your mother ever told you about me. I hope she didn't. I hope you grew up happy and loved and free from the shadow of what I did. Grace's voice wavered. I won't make excuses. There are no excuses for what I allowed to happen. I was weak. I was selfish. I let my mother convince me that the worst possible choice was the easiest one. I almost cost you your mother. I almost cost you your sister. I almost destroyed everything good and beautiful in the world because I wasn't strong enough to stand up for what was right. Your mother is the strongest person I have ever known. I didn't appreciate that when I had the chance. I didn't appreciate anything I had. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. And I know you have nothing to forgive me for. You don't owe me anything. Not your anger, not your pity, not even your acknowledgement that I ever existed. I'm writing because I wanted you to know, from me, in my own words. Your mother saved you. She fought for you when she couldn't move or speak or do anything but listen to the worst things human beings can do to each other. And she won. Be grateful for her every day. Be the kind of people she raised you to be. And when you have children of your own, love them the way she loved you. That's all I wanted to say. Your father, Andrew Cole. Grace set the letter down. The kitchen was silent. Hope looked at me. Did you know about this? No, I said honestly. I had no idea. Are you okay? I thought about it. 20 years. 20 years since I woke up from that coma. 20 years since Margaret was led away in handcuffs. 20 years of building a life, raising my daughters, running the foundation, making a difference. I'm okay, I said. Are you? Grace picked up the letter again, looked at it for a long moment. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and handed it to me. I don't need to keep this, she said. I know who my family is. I've always known. Hope nodded. We don't need a letter from a stranger to tell us who we are, she said. We're Brennans. We're your daughters. That's all that matters. I took the letter, held it for a moment, then I walked to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames. We watched it burn together, the last words of Andrew Cole, the man who had stood over my hospital bed and wished I would die faster, turned to ash and smoke and nothing. That's closure, Grace said quietly. No, I said. That's just paper burning. Closure is what we built. What we have, what we are. I looked at my daughters, strong, kind, fierce. Closure is knowing that they wanted me dead, and here I am, 20 years later, surrounded by people I love. Living a life they tried to steal. I smiled. That's the only closure I ever needed. 1 year later, the Hope and Grace Foundation celebrated its 20th anniversary with a gala in Hartford. Over those 20 years, we had helped more than 15,000 patients advocate for their rights. We had changed laws, trained medical professionals, built a network of advocates across the country who made sure that what happened to me would never happen to anyone else. I stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd. My father was in the front row, 87 years old, still sharp, still stubborn. Still the man who had driven through the night to save his daughter's life. Elena was beside him, the woman who had risked everything to help a stranger in a hospital bed, the woman who had become my partner, my friend, my sister in every way that mattered. My daughters were there with their families. Hope with her husband and 2 children, Grace with her wife and their adopted son. 3 generations, all because a nurse named Elena Vasquez had asked a simple question. Can you hear me? I cleared my throat. 20 years ago, I died. The room went silent. I died in a hospital bed while my husband stood in the corner checking his phone. I died while my mother-in-law calculated how long she would have to wait to inherit my life insurance. I died while my babies, were taken from me before I ever got to hold them. I paused, except I didn't die. I was trapped, locked inside a body that couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except listen and wait and pray. For 30 days, I heard them plan my murder, heard them celebrate my death, heard them decide to sell one of my daughters like property. And for 30 days, I fought, not with my body, which was useless, not with my voice, which was silent. I fought with my mind, with my will, with the absolute refusal to let them win. I looked at Elena. I had help, a nurse who believed me when no one else would, a father who drove through the night and fought through a system designed to keep him away, friends and allies who risked everything to save someone they barely knew. I looked at my daughters, and I had a reason to fight. 2 reasons, Hope and Grace. The daughters I almost never got to meet. The daughters who are now mothers themselves, carrying forward a legacy of strength and survival. I took a breath. This foundation exists because of what happened to me, but it continues because of you. All of you, the doctors and nurses and advocates who make sure no one else has to go through what I went through. The donors who fund our work, the families we've helped, and the lives we've saved. I smiled. They wanted me dead. They wanted me erased. They wanted me to disappear quietly so they could take everything I loved. But here I am, 20 years later, standing in this room full of people who have dedicated their lives to protecting the vulnerable and the voiceless. They failed, and we won. Thank you. The room erupted in applause. I stepped away from the podium. My father was waiting. He hugged me with the same fierce strength he had shown when he walked into my hospital room 20 years ago and told me he wasn't leaving. "I'm proud of you, baby girl," he said. "Your mother would be proud too. I know, Dad. I know." I pulled back, looked at him, at Elena, beside him, at my daughters and their families gathered around, at the hundreds of people who had come to celebrate 20 years of fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. This was my legacy. Not revenge, not survival, not even justice. This, love, family, purpose. The life they tried to steal transformed into something they never could have imagined, something beautiful. That night, after the gala ended and the guests went home, I sat alone on my back porch, the same porch where I had watched my daughters chase fireflies 15 years before, where I had told them that sometimes the best thing we can do is let go. The stars were bright overhead. A warm spring breeze rustled through the trees. I thought about the woman I had been 20 years ago, trapped in a hospital bed, unable to move, listening to her own death being planned. I thought about all the moments since then, the therapy, the nightmares, the slow, painful process of learning to trust again, the joy of watching my daughters grow, the satisfaction of building something meaningful from the ashes of destruction. I thought about Margaret, dead in a prison cell, Andrew, dying alone in a rented room. Jennifer disappeared into obscurity. They were gone, and I was still here, still breathing, still living, still winning. A firefly rose from the grass beside the porch, blinking its light in the darkness. I watched it drift upward, toward the stars. "Bye-bye, firefly," I whispered. The same words Hope had spoken 15 years ago. Then I stood up, went inside, closed the door, on the past, on the pain, on everything they had tried to do to me. The door was closed, and I was finally, completely, irrevocably free. The lesson here is simple, but unforgettable. They wanted her dead. They wanted her erased. But you cannot bury a mother. You plant her, and she grows back stronger, fiercer, more alive than ever. This story reminds us that our greatest weapon isn't physical strength. It's the refusal to give up. It's having someone who believes in us when we can't speak for ourselves. It's the love that makes us fight when fighting seems impossible. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or gave you strength, please hit that like button. Drop a comment and share your thoughts. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Remember, no matter how dark things get, Brennans don't quit, and neither should you. This content has been carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful stories and valuable life lessons. Thank you for being part of our community.